She walked 40 miles on feet that were nothing but raw meat to meet a man who'd been dead for 3 months. Stranded in the Montana wilderness with no money and nowhere to go, she had only one choice: knock on the door of two strangers' cabin. And that's when everything changed. The sun was dying over the Montana territory, bleeding crimson across the September sky like a wound that wouldn't close. Ethan Wolfe watched it sink behind the ragged peaks of the Bitterroot Range, his weathered hands loose on the reins, his body moving with the tired rhythm of his horse beneath him. 52 years old, 15 of them spent on this mountain with his twin brother Nathan, building something out of nothing, living a life that asked for sweat and blood and gave back silence and solitude in return. He didn't mind the silence anymore. He'd earned it. The ranch spread out below him as he descended the rocky trail, 200 acres of stubborn grass and pine, a creek that ran cold even in August, in the cabin he and Nathan had built with their own hands 2 decades past. Timber Ridge, they called it, home such as it was, a place for men who didn't need much and didn't ask for more. Ethan had ridden to the north pasture that morning to check the fence line where the wolves had been testing their boundaries, looking for weak points for easy meat. He'd found tracks fresh enough to make him wary, old enough to tell him the pack was being cautious. Smart. Wolves in Montana weren't the mindless killers people made them out to be. They were survivors just like him. They understood territory and patience and the long game of staying alive in country that didn't forgive mistakes. He'd reinforced the weak sections with wire and prayer, knowing both would hold about as long as the wolves decided to let them. Then he turned his horse toward home, thinking about the stew Nathan would have simmering on the stove, about the whiskey they'd share after supper, about the comfortable quiet that filled the cabin like smoke from the fireplace. Ethan didn't expect company. They never got company. Not anymore. So when he saw the stagecoach parked in front of the cabin, dust still settling around its wheels, his first thought was that someone had died. That's what coaches meant out here. Death or law, and neither one was welcome. He touched his heels to the horse's flanks, urging it faster down the slope. The light was fading quick now, shadows pooling in the low places, turning the world gray and uncertain. As he got closer, he could make out old Henderson standing by the coach door, hat in his hands, looking like a man who'd been asked to deliver bad news and didn't know how to start. Henderson ran the weekly stage from Billings. 60 years old if he was a dayface, like dried leather eyes that had seen too much road and not enough kindness. He looked up as Ethan approached, relief washing over his features like rain. "Mr. Wolfe," Henderson called, voice rough as gravel. "I got a situation here." Ethan swung down from his horse boots, hitting the hard-packed earth with a thud that seemed too loud in the strange stillness. The cabin door was closed. Nathan would have come out by now if he'd known there was company, which meant Nathan was either in the barn or hadn't heard the coach arrive. Either way, Ethan was alone with whatever situation Henderson had brought to his doorstep. "What kind of situation?" Ethan asked, keeping his voice level, his eyes on the coach. Henderson shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "Well, sir, it's a young lady. Says she's supposed to be here. Says she's supposed to be meeting Jonas Blackwood." The name hit Ethan like a fist to the gut. Jonas. His cousin on their mother's side, the only family they'd kept contact with after leaving Missouri. Dead 3 months now, thrown from a spooked horse neck, broken clean, buried on the hill overlooking the creek. Jonas, who'd lived 5 miles north in a cabin, much like this one, who'd been talking last winter about getting a mail order, bride, about bringing a woman out to help with the household to build something more than just survival. Jonas, who'd sent away for a bride and then died before she could arrive. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Jonas is dead. Been dead since June." "That's what I told her, sir. But she paid for passage all the way from Philadelphia. Used up every cent she had getting here. And then—" Henderson trailed off, looking at the coach like it contained something he didn't want to explain. "Then what?" "Then she ran out of money halfway from Billings. I couldn't just leave her on the side of the road, Mr. Wolfe. So she walked the last 40 miles over 4 days. I came across her this morning about 10 miles back. She was—" He shook his head. "She couldn't walk anymore. Feet torn up, something terrible. I brought her here because I didn't know where else to take her. She keeps saying this is where she's supposed to be." Ethan felt something cold settle in his chest. A woman, alone, injured, looking for a dead man. This was the kind of complication he'd spent 15 years avoiding, the kind of entanglement that led to nothing but trouble and heartache and memories that stuck like burrs in your mind. "She and the coach?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Can't hardly move. Tried to get her to step down when we arrived, but her feet—" Henderson grimaced. "They're bad, Mr. Wolf. Real bad." Ethan moved toward the coach, every instinct telling him to turn away, to send Henderson back down the mountain with his passenger and his problems. But he'd been raised better than that. His mother, God rest her, had taught him and Nathan that you didn't leave people to suffer if you could help it. That mercy was a duty, not a choice, even when mercy complicated your life beyond measure. He reached for the coach door, pulling it open. The interior was dim shadows thick in the fading light. For a moment he couldn't make out anything. Then his eyes adjusted and he saw her. She was small. That was his first thought. Small and pale and folded in on herself like something broken. Blonde hair hung loose around her face, tangled and dusty from the road. Her dress, which might have been nice once, was torn and stained the hem black with dried mud and what looked like blood. But it was her eyes that caught him. Blue, clear as mountain water, and filled with a desperation so raw it made his chest ache. She looked at him like he was either her salvation or her executioner, and she wasn't sure which. "Are you Jonas Blackwood?" Her voice was barely a whisper, threaded through with pain and exhaustion. "No, ma'am. I'm Ethan Wolf. Jonas was my cousin. He—" Ethan paused, searching for gentle words and finding none. "He passed 3 months back. Horse accident." The hope in her eyes flickered and died like a candle in wind. She didn't cry, didn't gasp or wail or do any of the things women in stories did when their dreams fell apart. She just sat there very still, and Ethan watched something inside her go dark. "Then I have nowhere to go," she said. Simple, final, like she was stating a fact about the weather. Ethan studied her more carefully now, young, maybe 23, 24. Too young to look that tired. Too young to have that kind of defeat in her eyes. Her hands were clasped in her lap, knuckles white, trembling slightly. Not from cold, from something deeper, something that lived in the bones. "What's your name?" he asked. "Claire. Claire Bennett, from Philadelphia." She took a shallow breath, wincing. "Mr. Blackwood's advertisement said he needed a wife. Someone hardy, willing to work. I answered 8 months ago. He sent travel money in April, $200. But my father's illness delayed me for months. By the time I could leave, it was August. I used it all getting here. And then the stage." She looked away. "I didn't have enough for the last leg. The driver said he'd wait in Billings until I could send for more money, but I didn't have anyone to send to. So I walked 40 miles through Montana territory, alone." Ethan felt something twist in his gut. Respect, maybe, or horror, possibly both. "Can you stand?" he asked. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I haven't tried since this morning." Ethan glanced back at Henderson, who was watching with the careful neutrality of a man who wanted no part of whatever was about to happen. Then Ethan looked at the cabin, at the warm light starting to glow in the windows as Nathan lit the lamps inside. He thought about turning this woman away, about telling Henderson to take her to the nearest town, to leave her at a church or a boarding house or anywhere that wasn't here. But he looked at her feet. They weren't feet anymore. Not really. They were raw meat wrapped in the shredded remains of what had once been decent leather shoes. Blood had soaked through her stockings, dried in dark patches against pale skin. The flesh around her ankles was swollen, mottled purple and red. He could see where the skin had split, where infection was probably already setting in if he didn't tend to it soon. She'd walked 40 miles on those feet, through mountain passes and rocky ground, with no food and little water, because she'd had no choice, because she'd used every resource she had to get here to honor a promise to a dead man she'd never met. That took a kind of strength Ethan recognized, the same kind of strength that had brought him and Nathan to this mountain 20 years ago with nothing but hope and stubbornness. The same kind of strength that kept you moving forward when every logical part of your brain screamed to quit. He couldn't leave her. "I'm going to lift you down," he said. "It's going to hurt." "Everything hurts," Claire said. "One more pain won't make much difference." Ethan reached into the coach, sliding one arm behind her shoulders, the other beneath her knees. She was lighter than he expected, all bones and grit with nothing spare. When he lifted her, she made a small sound in the back of her throat, quickly stifled. He felt her stiffen against the pain, felt the way her hands clutched at his shirt, desperate for something solid to hold on to. She smelled like sweat and dust and blood, like survival. He carried her toward the cabin, and the door opened before he reached it. Nathan stood in the doorway, backlit by lamplight, identical to Ethan in every way that mattered. Same height, same build, same gray eyes that had seen too much and learned to see less. But where Ethan wore a full beard, Nathan kept his trim short and neat. And where Ethan moved with careful deliberation, Nathan had always been the quicker one, the sharper one. Right now, Nathan looked stunned. What in God's name? Nathan's voice was quiet, but Ethan heard the edge in it. The warning. Get the medical kit, Ethan said. Her feet are torn up. Needs cleaning and bandaging. Probably needs whiskey and a bed, too. Nathan didn't move. Who is she? Claire Bennett, from Philadelphia. She came for Jonas. Understanding dawned in Nathan's eyes. He'd been there last winter when Jonas had talked about his plan, about the advertisement he'd placed in 3 Eastern newspapers. Hardy woman wanted. Must be willing to work hard. Remote location. Respond to Jonas Blackwood, Timber Ridge, Montana territory. Jonas had been lonely. They all had been. But Jonas had decided to do something about it. Had decided to bring a woman into this hard country to build something softer than survival. And then he died, and they'd thought that was the end of it. They'd thought wrong. Jonas has been dead 3 months, Nathan said. She knows, Ethan replied. But she's here, and she can't walk. So get the medical kit, Nathan. We can figure out the rest after. Nathan looked at Claire, really looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. He saw what Ethan had seen. The exhaustion, the pain, the desperate courage it had taken to walk 40 miles on shredded feet because the alternative was worse. He stepped aside, letting Ethan carry her into the cabin. The interior was warm, the fireplace crackling with fresh wood, the smell of venison stew hanging in the air. It was a man's space, all hard edges and practical surfaces, but it was clean. Nathan kept it that way, had always been particular about order, even when Ethan let things slide. 2 chairs by the fire, a rough-hewn table, shelves lined with supplies and tools, and in the back, 2 bedrooms, one on either side of the main room. Ethan carried Claire to his bedroom, the one that used to belong to Jonas when Jonas stayed over, the one that still held ghosts. Ethan tried not to think about. He laid her on the bed as gently as he could, and she let out a breath she'd been holding, eyes squeezed shut against the pain. Nathan's getting supplies, Ethan said. We'll clean those feet, get you bandaged up. You'll be safe here tonight. Claire's eyes opened, fixing on him. And tomorrow we'll figure out, Ethan said, because he didn't have an answer. Because bringing a woman into this cabin, into the life he and Nathan had built on isolation and routine, was like throwing a stone into still water. The ripples would spread whether he wanted them to or not. Nathan appeared with the medical kit, a battered leather case that held bandages and salves, and a bottle of whiskey that had saved them from infection more times than Ethan could count. He also carried a basin of warm water and clean cloths, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd tended wounds before. This is going to hurt, Nathan said to Claire, kneeling beside the bed. Bad. I know, Claire said. Nathan looked at Ethan. Hold her shoulders. She's going to jerk when I start cleaning. Ethan positioned himself at the head of the bed, hands gentle on Claire's shoulders. He could feel the tension thrumming through her, the way she was bracing for pain she knew was coming. Below, Nathan began the careful work of removing what was left of her shoes and stockings, peeling away fabric that had bonded to wounds. Claire bit her lip hard enough to draw blood, but she didn't scream. Didn't even whimper. Just breathed in short, sharp gasps while Nathan worked, while he cleaned away 4 days of dirt and blood, revealing the full extent of the damage. Blisters opened and kept walking, Nathan said quietly. Skins torn clean through to muscle in places. How she made it 40 miles like this. He shook his head. Stubborn or desperate, maybe both. Both, Claire said through gritted teeth. Definitely both. Nathan started washing the wounds with the warm water, and Claire's hands fisted in the quilt beneath her. Ethan felt her shoulders shake, felt the way she was fighting to stay still, to not pull away from the pain. He found himself murmuring things he didn't plan, low words about breathing through it, about how she was doing fine, about how the worst would be over soon. He didn't know if he was lying or not. When Nathan reached for the whiskey, Claire's eyes went wide. What's that for? Disinfectant, Nathan said. Best we've got out here. It's going to burn like hellfire. Wait, Claire said. Wait, please. I need to. She didn't finish. Couldn't. Because Nathan poured the whiskey over the open wounds on her feet, and the scream that tore out of her throat was pure animal agony, raw and primal, and utterly unstoppable. Her body arched off the bed, every muscle going rigid, and Ethan pressed down on her shoulders, holding her steady, while the pain ripped through her. Then she went limp, passed clean out. Nathan sat back on his heels, looking at the unconscious woman on the bed, then at his brother. What are we doing, Ethan? Helping, Ethan said. For how long? I don't know. Nathan stood wiping his hands on a cloth. She came for Jonas, for a husband, for a home. We can't give her that. No, Ethan agreed. We can't. So what do we give her? Ethan looked at Claire's pale face, at the way her hair spread across his pillow, like spilled wheat. At the bandages Nathan was wrapping around her feet with practiced care, making sure they were tight enough to support but loose enough to let the wounds breathe. At the rise and fall of her chest as she breathed through unconsciousness, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion it had been fighting for days. We give her time, Ethan said. Time to heal, time to figure out what comes next. That's all we can offer. Nathan finished bandaging, then pulled a quilt over Claire's sleeping form. And then she decides. Stay in Montana, find work somewhere, or go back east if that's what she wants. But she decides, not us. Nathan moved toward the door, pausing in the threshold. You remember what happened last time we brought a woman into this cabin? I remember, Ethan said quietly. Every day. Margaret couldn't handle it. The isolation, the work. It broke her. Claire's not Margaret. How do you know? Ethan didn't have an answer for that, because he didn't know. Couldn't know. All he knew was that Claire Bennett had walked 40 miles on feet that should have stopped her after 10. That she'd come 2,000 miles on a promise from a dead man. That she'd looked at him with eyes that held no illusions, no false hope, just a bone-deep determination to survive. That was something Margaret had never had. I don't know, Ethan finally said. But she's here now, and those feet won't carry her anywhere for weeks. So we'll find out. Nathan nodded slowly, then left the room, pulling the door closed behind him. Ethan stood there for a long moment, looking at the woman who'd appeared like a ghost from a past he'd thought was buried. Behind him, he heard Nathan in the main room, heard the clink of glasses, the gurgle of whiskey being poured. He should go out there, should sit with his brother and talk through what this meant, what complications this was going to bring. Should plan and strategize and figure out how to handle the situation with minimum disruption to their carefully constructed life. Instead, he pulled the chair from the corner, positioned it beside the bed, and sat down, watching Claire breathe, watching color slowly return to her cheeks as the warmth of the cabin and the mercy of unconsciousness let her body begin the long work of healing. Outside, Henderson's coach rattled away down the mountain road, heading back toward Billings, leaving Claire Bennett and all her complications behind. Ethan listened to the sound fade into distance, into silence, into the night that was falling fast and cold over Timber Ridge. When he finally joined Nathan in the main room, his brother had 2 glasses of whiskey poured and waiting. They sat in their usual chairs by the fire, drinking in the silence they'd perfected over 15 years. But the silence felt different now, heavier, full of questions neither of them wanted to ask. Her things are still in the coach, Nathan said eventually. Henderson left her trunk on the porch. Bring it in tomorrow, Ethan said. Put it in the room with her. That used to be your room. I'll take Jonas's old space. The spare room where Margaret had died. Jonas had stayed in it whenever he visited, but before that it had been hers. The room Ethan had avoided for 3 years. Maybe it was time. Nathan swirled whiskey in his glass, watching the firelight catch in the amber liquid. What if she wants to stay? Here on the mountain. Jonas's cabin is still standing, 5 miles north, empty since he died. She could, I don't know. We could help her get set up there, bring her supplies until she's on her feet. Ethan considered that. A woman alone in a mountain cabin. It was madness, dangerous, the kind of thing that got people killed when winter came hard and help was too far away. But it was also the only solution that didn't involve either keeping her here in their cabin or sending her away to fend for herself in a town full of strangers. We'll ask her, Ethan said. When she wakes up, give her options, let her choose, and if she chooses to stay here, Then we deal with it. Nathan laughed short and bitter. Deal with it, like we dealt with Margaret. The name hung between them like smoke. Margaret, Ethan's wife. The woman he'd brought to this mountain 7 years ago thinking love would be enough to overcome loneliness. Thinking he could be what she needed while still being who he was. He'd been wrong. Margaret had lasted 2 years. 2 years of slowly fading, of becoming a ghost in her own skin, of looking at him with eyes that held nothing but quiet desperation. And then she'd gotten pregnant, and the pregnancy had been hard, and the birth had been impossible, and she died screaming curses at him while the baby died with her. Ethan had buried them both on the hill overlooking the creek, had stood there with Nathan at his side, both of them silent, both of them knowing that some mistakes you carried forever. He hadn't touched a woman since, hadn't wanted to. The guilt was weight enough. Margaret was my wife, Ethan said quietly. My responsibility, my failure. Claire is neither. Then what is she? Ethan finished his whiskey, set the glass down with a soft clink. She's someone who needs help. That's all. We help her, then she leaves. Clean, simple. But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. Nothing about this would be clean or simple. Because Claire Bennett had appeared on his doorstep like an answer to a prayer he hadn't prayed. And her presence was already changing things in ways he couldn't see yet, but could feel like pressure before a storm. In the bedroom, through the closed door, he heard her stir. A small sound pain, dragging her up from unconscious mercy into waking awareness. He stood without thinking, moving toward the door, Nathan rising with him. They found her trying to sit up, confusion and panic flashing across her face as she took in unfamiliar surroundings. Her hands clutched at the quilt, and her breathing came fast and shallow, the kind of breathing that preceded screaming or fighting or both. Easy, Ethan said, hands visible, non-threatening. You're safe. You passed out while we were cleaning your feet. This is my room. You've been asleep about an hour. Claire's eyes found him, then shifted to Nathan. Identical faces, identical builds. She blinked, processing. There are two of you. Brothers, Nathan said. Twins? I'm Nathan, he's Ethan. We own this ranch together. Jonas never mentioned. She trailed off, wincing, as she shifted position and her bandaged feet reminded her why she was here. Where is Jonas buried? The question caught Ethan off guard. Not what happened to him. Not how, just where, like she needed to know so she could properly mourn a man she'd never met but had been prepared to marry. On the hill, Ethan said, overlooking the creek. We can take you there tomorrow if you want, if you can manage the walk. I can't walk, Claire said. Simple. Matter of fact. That's why I'm here, isn't it? Because I couldn't walk anymore? The feet will heal, Nathan said. 6 weeks, maybe 8. You'll walk again. And until then, Ethan and Nathan exchanged glances. This was the conversation they'd been avoiding, the question that had no good answer. How long she'd stay, what her staying meant, what obligations they had, and which ones they were willing to accept. Until then, you stay here, Ethan said, making the decision even as Nathan's jaw tightened. We've got the room, got supplies. You can't travel on those feet, and we're not sending you to town to fend for yourself. I can work, Claire said quickly. I'm not asking for charity. Whatever needs doing, I'll do it. Cooking, cleaning, mending. I'm not afraid of hard work. You can barely sit up, Nathan pointed out. Then I'll work sitting down. Her chin lifted, stubborn. I didn't come all this way to be a burden. Jonas's advertisement said he needed someone hardy, someone willing to work. That's what I am. That's what I can be. Ethan studied her. Even now in pain, exhausted, stranded 2,000 miles from anything familiar, she was negotiating, trying to establish her value to prove she wasn't dead weight. That took a kind of pride he understood, the kind of pride that would rather break than bend. We'll figure it out, he said. First you heal, then we talk about the rest. How long do I have, Claire asked, before you expect me to leave? The question was direct, blunt. The kind of question someone asked when they'd learned not to trust soft promises or vague timelines. When they'd learned that people's patience had limits and you needed to know exactly where those limits were. As long as it takes for your feet to heal, Ethan said. After that, your choice. We can help you get to Jonas's cabin if you want to try making a go of it there. Or we can help you get to town, find work. Or we can stake you enough to get back east if that's where you want to go. And if I want to stay here, The words hung in the air like a challenge. Nathan went very still. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. This is a working ranch, Ethan said carefully. Nathan and we've been running it ourselves for 15 years. We've got our routines, our ways of doing things. A woman living here, it would complicate things, Claire finished. I understand, but her eyes said she didn't, or maybe she did and was past caring about complications. Maybe when you'd walk 40 miles on shredded feet, complications seemed manageable compared to the alternative. We're not offering what Jonas was offering, Nathan said bluntly. He wanted a wife. We don't. The words were harsh, but Ethan was grateful for them. Better to be clear now than to let hope take root in ground that couldn't support it. Claire's face remained carefully neutral. I didn't come here expecting love, Mr. Wolf. I came expecting work and a roof. Seems like you've got both. It's not that simple, Ethan said. Why not? Because it never is, Ethan thought. Because women and men living under the same roof led to expectations and complications and needs that went beyond work and shelter. Because he'd tried this before and it had ended with graves on a hill and guilt that never stopped gnawing. Because he was 52 years old and had learned the hard way that some wounds never healed, they just scarred over and waited for you to forget before they opened up again. But he didn't say any of that. Instead, he said, "You need food. When's the last time you ate?" Claire thought about it. 3 days ago, maybe 4. Nathan cursed under his breath, then headed for the kitchen. Ethan heard him ladling stew into a bowl, the clink of a spoon. When he returned, he handed it to Claire, who took it with trembling hands. Eat slow, Nathan warned. Your stomach's not used to food. You eat too fast, you'll just bring it back up. Claire nodded, bringing a spoonful to her lips. She ate carefully, methodically, like someone who'd learned to make small portions last. Ethan and Nathan watched her from their chairs by the fire, an awkward triangle of people who didn't know how to be in the same space yet. After a few minutes, Claire set the bowl aside half-finished. Thank you, I'm sorry I can't eat more right now. It's enough for now, Nathan said, taking the bowl. Sleep. Tomorrow you'll eat more. But Claire didn't lie back down. Instead, she looked at both of them, her expression serious. I need to know something before I sleep, before this goes any further. What? Ethan asked. Why are you helping me, really? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Jonas is dead, so whatever arrangement I had with him died with him. You could have sent me away with Henderson, could have given me enough money to get to town and washed your hands of the whole situation. But you didn't. Why? It was a good question, a fair question. Ethan found himself without a good answer. Because you walked 40 miles on feet that should have stopped you after 10, Nathan said quietly. That takes grit. We respect grit out here. And because leaving you would have been wrong, Ethan added. We're not good men, Miss Bennett, but we're not cruel ones either. Claire looked between them, reading their faces for lies or hidden motives. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her because she nodded and lay back down, her body sinking into the mattress with a sigh that spoke of exhaustion beyond measure. Thank you, she said again, her eyes already closing, for the grit and the lack of cruelty. It's more than I've had in a long time. They left her there, pulling the door closed quietly. Back in the main room, the fire had burned down to coals, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Ethan poured them both more whiskey without asking if Nathan wanted it. They drank in silence, processing the day's unexpected turn. So what happens now? Nathan finally asked. The same question as before, but weighted differently now. I don't know, Ethan admitted, but we've done it now. She's here. We're responsible for her until she's not. You know what people will say if word gets out? Let them say it. Ethan, I know. He did know, knew what it looked like. A young woman living with 2 unmarried men. The scandal, the assumptions, the judgments. But he also knew that Claire Bennett had come here on a promise, had survived on nothing but will and stubbornness, and turning her out now would make him the kind of man he'd sworn never to be. The kind of man his father had been. Cold, practical, willing to sacrifice people for convenience. 6 weeks, Nathan said. We give her 6 weeks to heal. Then we help her figure out next steps. But Ethan, we can't let her stay here permanent. You know we can't. Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to say why not, what harm could it do? But he knew the answer. The same answer that had been true with Margaret, because bringing a woman into their carefully constructed isolation would change everything, would introduce needs and wants and complications they'd spent 15 years learning to live without, would open doors better left closed. 6 weeks, he agreed, then we'll see. They sat until the fire died completely, until the cabin grew cold, and the night pressed in through the windows like something alive. When they finally stood to go to their separate rooms, Nathan paused. She whispered something, he said, right before she passed out, while I was bandaging her feet. What? She said I didn't have a choice. Nathan looked at his brother. What do you think she meant? Ethan thought about Claire's eyes. About the desperation there, the fear lurking beneath stubbornness. About how she'd walked 40 miles rather than turn back. About how she'd used her last cent getting here, burning every bridge behind her. I think she means exactly what she said, Ethan replied. Coming here wasn't hope. It was survival. Jonas's advertisement wasn't an opportunity. It was a last resort. What was she running from? I don't know, but whatever it was bad enough to make this mountain look like salvation. They parted then, each to their own room. Ethan lay in Jonas's old bed in the room where Margaret had died and stared at the ceiling. He could hear Claire's breathing through the thin wall, steady, deep. The breathing of someone who'd finally found safety enough to sleep. He wondered how long that safety would last. How long before whatever she was running from caught up. How long before she realized this mountain wasn't salvation at all, just a different kind of prison. How long before she broke the way Margaret had broken. Sleep was a long time coming. When it finally arrived, it brought dreams of walking through endless landscapes, feet bleeding sun, merciless and no destination in sight. Just walking because stopping meant dying, and dying meant losing whatever small spark of hope kept you moving forward. He woke in darkness to the sound of crying. Soft, muffled, coming from the room next door. Claire, he realized. Crying in her sleep, or maybe awake, he couldn't tell. He lay there listening, torn between going to her and staying where he was. The crying stopped after a few minutes, replaced by silence, then by the steady rhythm of breathing again. Ethan closed his eyes and willed himself back to sleep. Tomorrow they would start figuring out what Claire Bennett's presence meant, what accommodations needed to be made, what boundaries needed to be established, how 3 people were going to share a space built for 2. Tomorrow they would start navigating the complications. But tonight there was just this, a woman sleeping in the next room, her feet wrapped in bandages, her future uncertain, her past a mystery, and 2 brothers lying awake in the darkness, wondering what they'd invited into their carefully ordered lives, wondering if mercy was always worth its cost. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the cabin's corners, reminding them that winter was coming, that the mountain didn't care about human complications or moral dilemmas, that survival up here required hard choices and harder consequences, that mercy, like everything else in this country, was a luxury you couldn't always afford. Morning came cold and gray autumn, settling into the mountain valleys like ash. Ethan woke to the smell of coffee, which meant Nathan was already up, already working through the morning routine they'd perfected over 15 years. Feed the horses, check the stock, start the fire, brew coffee strong enough to strip paint. Except this morning, the routine had a crack in it. A woman sleeping in the next room. A complication they hadn't planned for and didn't know how to navigate. Ethan dressed quietly, pulling on worn denim and a flannel shirt that had seen better decades. His joints protested the cold, a reminder that 52 wasn't young anymore, that the mountain took its toll in increments you didn't notice until you did. He ran a hand through graying hair, caught his reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. Same face he'd seen yesterday. Same face he'd see tomorrow. Nothing changed and everything different. He found Nathan in the kitchen, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. His brother looked like he hadn't slept much either. Dark circles under eyes that matched Ethan's exactly tension in shoulders and that usually moved with easy confidence. She awake? Nathan asked, voice low. Haven't checked. Should we? Ethan took the offered coffee, let the heat seep into his palms. Let her sleep. Body needs rest to heal. They stood in the kitchen drinking coffee in silence, both of them acutely aware of the closed bedroom door, of the presence behind it that had shifted the cabin's entire gravity. Outside, the world was waking up, birds calling, wind moving through pine branches, the creek running its eternal course down the mountain. Everything normal. Everything changed. We need to talk about logistics, Nathan said finally. If she's staying 6 weeks, we need rules, boundaries. I know. She can't share our space without structure. It'll get messy. I know, Ethan repeated, hearing the edge in his own voice. Because he did know. Had learned it the hard way with Margaret. Had learned that proximity without boundaries led to assumptions, to blurred lines, to needs neither party could meet. I'll take the spare room permanently, Ethan said. Move my things today. She keeps the main bedroom until she's healed enough to move around. And after we figure out Jonas's cabin, get it livable again. If she wants to try making a go of it, there we help. If not, we help her get to town. Nathan nodded, satisfied with the plan, even if neither of them believed it would be that simple. Plans never survived contact with reality, especially when reality involved a woman who'd walked 40 miles on shredded feet rather than turn back. That kind of determination didn't bow to plans. The bedroom door opened. Both brothers turned, coffee cups frozen halfway to their mouths. Claire stood in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame for support, her bandaged feet barely touching the floor. She'd slept in her dress, had no other clothes apparently, and her hair hung loose around pale shoulders. In the morning light, she looked even younger than she had last night. Fragile, like something the wind could carry away. But her eyes weren't fragile. They were clear and determined and fixed on the brothers with an intensity that made Ethan straighten unconsciously. I need to use the outhouse, she said. No preamble, no embarrassment, just a statement of fact. Nathan set his coffee down. You can't walk. Then I'll crawl. The hell you will, Ethan said, moving toward her before his brain caught up with his body. You'll tear those bandages open, get dirt in the wounds. Infection will kill you faster than pride. Claire's jaw tightened. I'm not asking you to carry me to the outhouse, Mr. Wolf. Ethan, and yes you are, because that's the only way you're getting there without doing more damage. They stared at each other, wills locked. Ethan saw her weighing options, calculating dignity against necessity, saw the moment she surrendered to reality, her shoulders dropping infinitesimally. Fine, she said, but this is humiliating. It's practical, Ethan corrected, moving close enough to lift her again. Humiliation is a luxury. Out here we deal in survival. He carried her outside, Nathan holding the door, morning air biting cold against exposed skin. The outhouse was 20 yards from the cabin, a solid structure they'd built with the same care as everything else. Ethan set Claire down on the wooden seat inside, stepped back. Call when you're done, he said. I can crawl back. Claire. She looked at him, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or just exhaustion with fighting battles that didn't matter. Fine, I'll call. Ethan waited outside, close enough to hear, but far enough to grant privacy. Nathan had gone back inside, giving them space for this awkward necessity. The morning was quiet except for the creak in the wind and the distant sound of a hawk crying somewhere high above. When Claire called, her voice was small but steady. Ethan carried her back inside, and this time she didn't fight it. Just let herself be lifted, let him navigate the threshold, let him set her down on the chair by the fire where Nathan had already placed cushions. Thank you, she said quietly. You need to eat, Nathan said, ladling something that looked like oatmeal into a bowl. Stomach should be able to handle this now. Claire took the bowl, ate slowly. Ethan watched her hands shake slightly, watched her force down food her body probably wanted to reject. But she kept going, methodical, determined. When she'd finished half, she set it aside. That's all I can manage. It's enough, Nathan said, taking the bowl. Give it an hour, try again. Silence settled over them, awkward and heavy. Three strangers forced into proximity by circumstance, none of them knowing what to say or how to navigate this strange new territory. Claire broke it first. You said Jonas is buried on a hill. Can I see? Ethan and Nathan exchanged glances. The grave was a half-mile up a steep trail. Claire couldn't walk 20 feet, let alone half a mile uphill. Not today, Ethan said. Maybe in a few weeks when you're stronger. I came 2,000 miles to meet him, Claire said. I think I should be allowed to visit his grave. You will, Ethan assured her, just not today. Today you rest. Let the feet start healing. Claire's hands fisted in her lap, frustration evident. But she nodded, accepting limits she couldn't fight. Tell me about him then, about Jonas. What kind of man was he? Ethan sat down across from her, Nathan leaning against the kitchen counter, both of them reaching back through memory for a man who'd been part of their lives since childhood. Good man, Ethan said. Honest. Worked hard. Came west with us 20 years ago. Built his cabin 5 miles north. Ran cattle, did some trapping. Kept to himself mostly. Why did he want a wife? Nathan answered that one. Loneliness. Same reason any man does. He was 48, never married. Figured he'd spent enough years alone. And he died before I could arrive. 3 months ago, Ethan confirmed. Horse spooked at something, mountain lion maybe, threw him, broke his neck, was dead before he hit the ground. Claire absorbed this, her face carefully neutral. Did he suffer? No, Nathan said. It was quick. She nodded slowly. That's something. I'm glad he didn't suffer. The care in her voice caught Ethan off guard. She was mourning a man she'd never met, grieving a future that had died before it could begin. That took a particular kind of heart, the kind that felt things deeply even when it hurt. Why did you answer his advertisement? Ethan asked. The question had been circling his mind since yesterday. What drove a young woman to cross a continent for a stranger? Claire was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on her skirt. When she spoke, her voice was measured, careful, like she was deciding how much truth to share. My father died 6 months ago. Heart gave out. He was a good man, but a terrible businessman. Left debts, $12,000 worth. She looked up, meeting Ethan's eyes. His creditor, Mr. Harrison Pruitt, was 60 years old, a widower. He came to our house a week after the funeral with a proposal. Marriage, Nathan guessed. Marriage. He'd forgive the debt if I married it in. Give me and my younger sister a home. Security. Claire's voice went flat. He was very clear about what the arrangement would entail. His needs, my duties. He laid it all out like a business transaction, which I suppose it was. Ethan felt something cold settle in his gut. You said no. I said I needed time to think. Then I found Jonas's advertisement in the newspaper. Hardy woman wanted, willing to work, remote location. It seemed, she searched for words, honest, direct. Jonas wasn't offering love or comfort. He was offering partnership, work, a place in the world. That was more than Pruitt was offering. So you ran, Nathan said. I chose, Claire corrected. There's a difference. Pruitt was one option. Jonas was another. I chose the one that let me keep something of myself. Ethan understood that better than she probably knew. The need to maintain some core of self even when circumstances tried to strip it away. The way dignity sometimes meant choosing the harder path because the easier one cost too much. And your sister, he asked, pain flickered across Claire's face. Married 3 months ago, a good man, a clerk. He's taking care of her. She's safe. She paused. I made sure she was settled before I left. Made sure she didn't need me anymore. Then I came here. Does she know where you are? I wrote her from the train, told her I was starting a new life, told her not to worry. Claire's laugh was bitter. I'm sure she's not worrying. She's probably relieved I'm gone. One less mouth to feed, one less problem to solve. You don't know that, Nathan said. Don't I? Claire looked at him. I was 23, unmarried. My father's debts hanging over me like a noose. I was a burden, Mr. Wolf. Coming here wasn't abandoning my family. It was freeing them. The bleakness in her voice made Ethan's chest ache. This was someone who'd learned to measure her worth by her usefulness, who'd internalized the idea that she was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be valued. He knew that feeling too, had felt it himself after Margaret died, after the whispers in town about how he'd failed his wife, failed his child, failed at the basic human task of keeping his family alive. You're not a burden here, he said. Claire looked at him skeptically. I can't walk, can't work, can't contribute. How am I not a burden? Because we're choosing to help you, Ethan said. That makes you a responsibility, not a burden. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. They stared at each other, something passing between them that Ethan couldn't name. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. Two people who'd learned the hard way that the world measured worth in cold equations and kindness was the exception rather than the rule. Nathan cleared his throat, breaking the moment. We need to check your bandages. Make sure infection isn't setting in. Claire nodded, extending her feet. Nathan knelt unwrapping the bandages with careful hands. Ethan moved closer, watching his brother examine the wounds. They looked better than last night. Still raw, still angry, but not the furious red that signaled infection. The flesh was swollen, but not hot to the touch. Healing, Nathan pronounced. Slow but clean. We'll keep changing the bandages twice a day. Keep them clean. Should be able to put weight on them in a week or so. A week, Claire repeated. And then we see how much you can handle. Build up slowly. No use rushing it and tearing everything open again. Nathan rebandaged the feet, his movements practiced and sure. Ethan watched Claire's face, saw her bite her lip against pain, but refused to make a sound. Stubborn, proud, unwilling to show weakness even when weakness was all she had. When Nathan finished, he stood. I need to check the stock. Ethan, you staying here? It wasn't really a question. Someone needed to stay with Claire in case she needed something, and Nathan was making it clear he wasn't volunteering. Ethan nodded, understanding the unspoken message. Nathan needed distance from this situation, needed to process the complication on his own terms. I'll handle things here, Ethan said. Check the north fence while you're out. Wolves have been testing it. Nathan grabbed his coat and rifle, paused at the door. Anything else you need from town? I'm riding in later for supplies. Coffee, Ethan said, and check if there's mail. Without mail, Claire asked after Nathan left. We get it once a month. Nathan rides to Bridger Falls, picks it up from the post office, usually just newspapers and supply catalogs. But sometimes, he trailed off. Sometimes there are letters from the old life, people we used to know. Claire studied him. You don't like going back to that life, even in letters. No, Ethan admitted, I don't. Then why keep getting the mail? Because Nathan does. He's not ready to cut all ties, so I don't push. And are you ready to cut all ties? Ethan thought about that, about the life they'd left in Missouri, the war that had broken something in both of them, the people who judged them for leaving, for choosing survival over honor, for refusing to die for causes they didn't believe in. I cut them a long time ago, he said. Some bridges, once you burn them, you don't rebuild. Claire nodded slowly. I understand that. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling, morning light strengthening through the windows. Ethan found himself studying her when she wasn't looking. The way she held herself, spine straight, despite exhaustion. The way her fingers never stopped moving, tracing patterns, or picking at her skirt, or clasping and unclasping. Nervous energy trapped in a body that couldn't move. Can I ask you something? Claire said eventually. Ask. Last night, Nathan mentioned someone named Margaret. He said she couldn't handle it here, the isolation. She paused. Who was she? Ethan's jaw tightened. He should have known this question would come. Should have prepared an answer. But the truth was he never knew what to say about Margaret. How to explain her without explaining all the ways he'd failed her. My wife, he said finally. She died 7 years ago. Childbirth. I'm sorry. Don't be, it was my fault. Claire's eyes sharpened. How? I brought her here, to this mountain. This isolation. She hated it. Hated the loneliness, the work, the distance from everything she knew. I thought, he stopped searching for words. I thought love would be enough. That if I loved her enough, she'd learn to love this life. But love doesn't work that way. What way does it work? Ethan looked at her. I don't know, never figured it out. Why did she come if she hated it? Same reason you did probably. Limited options. I met her in St. Louis. She was a seamstress. Poor family, no prospects. I offered security, a home. She accepted. And you loved her. The question was direct, probing. Ethan found himself answering honestly despite every instinct telling him to deflect. I thought I did. Or maybe I loved the idea of her, of not being alone anymore, of building something more than just survival. He shook his head. But I couldn't be what she needed. Couldn't leave this place even when I saw it was killing her. And when she got pregnant, when the baby came, he couldn't finish. It wasn't your fault, Claire said quietly. Childbirth is dangerous. Women die. It's not anyone's fault. She died screaming at me, Ethan said, cursing my name. The baby died with her. A girl. I never even got to hold her. He looked at Claire. That was my fault, all of it. Bringing Margaret here, getting her pregnant, not being able to save either of them. Claire was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle. You can't save everyone, Ethan. Sometimes people are drowning and you reach for them and they pull you under too. That doesn't make it your fault. How do you know? Because I watched my father drown, she said, in debt and shame and failure. I tried to save him, worked 3 jobs to help pay creditors, sold everything we own, but it wasn't enough. And when he died, part of me felt relief, because I could stop trying to save someone who didn't want to be saved. She met his eyes. That doesn't make me a good person, but it doesn't make me responsible for his choices either. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of guilt he'd carried so long it had become part of him. You think Margaret didn't want to be saved? I think maybe she wanted you to be someone you're not. And when you couldn't be that person, she blamed you for not changing. But Ethan, you can't change who you are at your core. Not for anyone. Margaret knew what she was signing up for. She made her choice. And when that choice killed her, then that's tragedy, not fault. They sat with that for a while, Ethan turning her words over in his mind, testing them against the guilt he'd worn like a second skin for 7 years. It didn't erase anything, didn't undo the screaming or the blood or the 2 graves on the hill. But it shifted something, made room for the possibility that he'd been carrying a burden that wasn't entirely his to carry. Thank you, he said finally. For what? For not telling me I'm being too hard on myself, for not offering empty comfort, for just, he gestured vaguely, for understanding. Claire smiled small and sad. We're all carrying ghosts, Ethan. Yours just have name. The conversation shifted after that to safer topics. The ranch, the work that needed doing, the coming winter and what preparations it required. Claire asked questions, good ones, showing genuine interest in the mechanics of mountain survival. How they handled snow, how they kept the stock fed when the ground froze, how they endured months of isolation when the passes closed. Ethan found himself talking more than he had in years, explaining things he usually kept to himself because Nathan already knew them and there was no one else to tell. He told her about the wolves that tested their boundaries every winter, about the bear that had broken into the smokehouse 3 years back and eaten half their winter meat, about the late spring blizzard that had killed 20 head of cattle in one night. He told her about the mountain, about how it was beautiful and brutal in equal measure, about how it gave nothing freely and took everything if you weren't careful, about how it had broken men tougher than him and would break her too if she let it. But it hasn't broken you, Claire observed. It's tried. Yet here you are. Here I am, Ian, Ethan agreed. Too stubborn to quit, too invested to walk away. This mountain and me, we've got an understanding. I respect it. It tolerates me. That's about as good as it gets. And Nathan, does he have the same understanding? Ethan considered that. Nathan's relationship with this place is different. He came here because I did. Stayed because I stayed. If I left tomorrow, he'd leave with me. But he'd never leave first. That's loyalty. That's being a twin. We're 2 halves of the same thing. Always have been. Even when we disagree, we move together. Must be nice, Claire said quietly, having someone that bound to you. It is, and it's a burden, because you can never make a choice that only affects you. Everything I do affects Nathan. Everything he does affects me. We learned that young. How young? 10, when our mother died. Cholera took her in 3 days. 1 minute she was fine, next she was burning up, next she was gone. Our father, Ethan's voice hardened. He handled it poorly, drank, became mean. Nathan and I, we had each other, had to. There was no one else. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. But the pain in his voice said otherwise. Some losses never healed. They just became part of the landscape you navigated. The door opened. Nathan returned carrying a cloth sack, his expression carefully neutral. Brought you something, he said to Claire, tossing the sack to her. She caught it surprised. Inside were women's clothes. Simple, practical, a dress, undergarments, thick stockings. How did you, Claire started. Widow Johnson in town. About your size. I explained the situation. She sent these, said to keep them. Claire's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them back furiously. I can't accept charity. It's not charity, Nathan said. It's practicality. You can't wear that same dress for 6 weeks. You'll start to smell. Despite herself, Claire laughed, a real laugh, surprised and genuine. Well, when you put it that way, get changed, Nathan said. Ethan can help you to the room. Then we need to talk, all three of us, about how this is going to work. 20 minutes later, Claire sat by the fire in the borrowed dress, her hair braided back, looking more human and less like a ghost. Nathan had made more coffee. Ethan had stoked the fire. They arranged themselves in a triangle, unconsciously positioning themselves at equal distances. 6 weeks, Nathan said. That's how long the doctor in town said feet like yours would take to heal properly. So we're looking at 6 weeks of you being here. We need rules. I agree, Claire said. You keep to the main bedroom until you can move around. We'll bring you food, help you with necessities. No shame in that, it's practical. Understood. Once you can move, you help with household tasks. Cooking, cleaning, mending, fair trade for room and board. I already said I'd work. And we don't touch you, Nathan continued. No assumptions, no expectations. You're here as a guest, not as, he searched for words, not as anything else. Claire's cheeks colored slightly. I wasn't expecting anything else. Good, because we're not offering it. Ethan watched his brother establish boundaries with military precision, understanding what Nathan was doing. Building walls, making sure everyone knew where the lines were. Smart, necessary, the kind of thing that prevented complications down the road. But something in Ethan resisted it, the coldness of it, the reduction of Claire to a problem to be managed rather than a person to be known. She's not a threat, Nathan, Ethan said quietly. I didn't say she was. You're treating her like one. Nathan's jaw tightened. I'm treating her like someone who could complicate our lives. Because she can. You know she can. I know you're scared, Ethan said. But rules won't protect you from what you're scared of. And what am I scared of? Same thing I am. Caring, getting attached, having to say goodbye when the 6 weeks are up. Silence fell. Nathan and Ethan stared at each other, years of unspoken communication passing between them. Claire watched, uncomfortable witness to a conversation she wasn't entirely part of. Finally, Nathan looked away. 6 weeks, he repeated. That's all. 6 weeks, Ethan agreed. But none of them believed it. The lie hung in the air between them, as obvious as the smoke rising from the fire. 6 weeks wouldn't be enough. Wouldn't be nearly enough to untangle whatever was already starting to knit itself together in this cabin. Claire's presence had changed something fundamental, had cracked open a door they'd spent 15 years keeping closed. And once a door opened, closing it again was never as simple as you hoped. They spent the rest of the day establishing routines. Nathan showed Claire where things were kept, how the stove worked, which supplies were running low. Ethan moved his belongings to Jonas's old room, trying not to think about the last time someone had slept in that bed, trying not to remember Margaret's screams. By evening, a tentative peace had settled over the cabin. Claire sat by the fire mending one of Nathan's shirts, her bandaged feet propped on a stool. Nathan cooked dinner, something with venison and potatoes. Ethan read yesterday's newspaper, pretending to focus on words that kept blurring into meaninglessness. They were 3 people learning to share space, learning each other's rhythms and boundaries, learning how to be in proximity without collision. It was harder than any of them expected, and easier too, because underneath the awkwardness was something else, something neither brother wanted to name but both could feel. Hope, the possibility that maybe isolation wasn't the only way to survive, that maybe letting someone in didn't automatically mean watching them break, that maybe this time could be different. But hope was dangerous. Hope made you vulnerable. And on this mountain, vulnerability got you killed. So they pushed it down, buried it under routines and rules and careful distance. Pretended they were just helping someone in need, nothing more. Pretended they didn't notice how Claire's laugh made the cabin feel warmer. How her presence filled spaces they hadn't realized were empty. How already after just one day, it was hard to remember what the cabin had felt like before she arrived. Outside, the first stars emerged. The temperature dropped. Winter's advance guard testing the mountain's defenses, looking for weaknesses. Inside, 3 people sat by the fire, each carrying their own ghosts, each hoping for something they couldn't quite name. And somewhere in the darkness, the wolves howled, reminding them that the mountain was patient, that it waited for everyone eventually. That survival was just postponing the inevitable. But for tonight, they had this warmth and shelter in the fragile beginning of something that might, if they were careful, if they were lucky, if they were brave enough, grow into something worth protecting. The days settled into rhythm, the kind that comes when survival demands structure. Claire's feet healed slowly, the angry red fading to pink, the swelling receding degree by painful degree. Each morning, Nathan changed her bandages with practiced efficiency, his touch clinical, but not unkind. Each evening, Ethan helped her to the outhouse and back their conversations growing longer, less guarded. Filled with the small truths people share when darkness makes confession easier. By the fifth day, Claire could stand for short periods, clinging to furniture, her face tight with concentration. By the seventh, she took her first tentative steps, 3 of them, before pain drove her back to the chair. Nathan watched from the kitchen, something like approval flickering in his eyes before he turned back to his work. By the 10th day, she was walking. Slowly, carefully, but walking. Good, Nathan said, watching her move from the bedroom to the table without assistance. Another week and you'll be ready for real work. I can work now, Claire said, lowering herself into a chair with visible relief. My hands work fine. She proved it. While the brothers worked the ranch, Claire took over the household tasks they'd been neglecting for years. She mended clothes with stitches so small they were almost invisible. She organized the chaotic pantry, grouping supplies by type and season. She cooked meals that were more than just fuel, adding herbs from the small garden, varying textures and flavors, in ways that made Nathan pause mid-bite, surprised by his own enjoyment. The cabin transformed around her presence. Small touches appeared. Wildflowers in a jar on the table, curtains on the windows sewn from spare fabric, the smell of bread baking instead of just beans reheating. It was subtle, gradual, but unmistakable. The cabin was becoming a home again. Ethan noticed. Noticed, too, how he looked forward to coming back from the north pasture, to seeing lamplight in the windows, to finding Claire reading by the fire or humming while she worked. Noticed how the silence that had been comfortable for 15 years now felt empty when she wasn't there to fill it. Nathan noticed, too. But Nathan's noticing came wrapped in tension and careful distance, in reminders that 6 weeks had a deadline, and deadlines had consequences. Don't get comfortable, Nathan said one evening, when Ethan lingered too long watching Claire knead bread dough, her movements rhythmic and sure. She's healing. Soon she'll be able to leave. Maybe she won't want to leave. Then we'll want her to. Nathan's voice was flat. Final. We agreed, Ethan. 6 weeks, then she goes. But even Nathan's resolve was cracking. Ethan saw it in small things. How Nathan made sure Claire's coffee was exactly the way she liked it. How he carved a walking stick for her without being asked, the wood sanded smooth, the grip perfect for her small hand. How his face softened when she thanked him, when she smiled that smile that transformed her entire face from serious to radiant. Ethan noticed when it changed, day 17. Nathan had returned from checking the north fence to find Claire struggling to lift a heavy pot from the stove. Without a word, he crossed the room, lifted it for her, poured the stew, then left. No lecture about resting. No reminder that she was still healing. Just help, given quietly the way you'd help family. That night, Ethan asked him about it. She's not a guest anymore, Nathan had said, whittling the walking stick by the fire. Guests leave. She's staying. That makes her something else. What? Nathan tested the grip he was carving, adjusting the curve to fit smaller hands. Hours. They were all pretending. Pretending this was temporary. Pretending attachment wasn't already setting in like roots, finding purchase in rocky soil. Pretending the 6-week deadline meant anything, when every day made the thought of her leaving more unbearable. On the 28th day, when Claire could finally manage the climb, Ethan took her to see Jonas's grave. 4 weeks had passed since her arrival. The angry wounds had closed pink scars replacing raw flesh. She still limped, still needed the walking stick Nathan had carved, but she could move. The walk was short but steep, a half-mile climb up the hill behind the cabin. Claire managed it with her walking stick, stopping frequently to rest, her breathing labored but determined. Ethan stayed close, ready to catch her if she stumbled, but she didn't. Just climbed with the same stubborn focus she brought to everything. The grave was simple. A wooden cross Ethan had carved himself, Jonas's name and dates burned into the wood. No flowery words, no epitaph. Just a name and the years he'd lived, the way Jonas would have wanted it. Claire stood there for a long time and one hand on the cross, saying nothing. Ethan waited at a respectful distance, giving her space to grieve a man she'd never met, but had crossed a continent to marry. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. I would have been a good wife to him. I know. I would have worked hard, kept his house, given him children if God allowed. She looked at Ethan. I would have tried to love him. Jonas would have appreciated that, but I wouldn't have succeeded. Claire's hand dropped from the cross. I can't love to order, Ethan. Can't manufacture feelings just because circumstances require them. Jonas deserved better than someone going through the motions. What makes you think that's what you would have done? Because that's what I always do. She turned to face him fully. My whole life has been doing what's required, being what's needed. I'm very good at it, but it's not the same as actually feeling anything real. Ethan studied her. You felt something real when you walked 40 miles on shredded feet. That wasn't duty. That was survival instinct. That was real. Fear is real, Claire agreed. Desperation is real, but love, I don't know if I'm capable of that anymore. I think I used it all up trying to save my father. There's nothing left. That's not true. How do you know? Because I see how you are with the chickens, Ethan said. How you talk to them like they're children. How you make sure each one gets their fair share of feed. Because I see how you arrange those wildflowers, spending 20 minutes getting them exactly right. Because you care, Claire. Maybe not in the big dramatic ways people write about in books, but in the small ways that actually matter. Claire looked away, blinking rapidly. Small ways aren't enough. They're all we've got out here. Grand gestures don't survive the mountain. Small consistencies do. Showing up every day, doing the work, being present. That's love in this country. The rest is just poetry. She was quiet for a moment, absorbing that. Then she nodded toward the grave. Is Margaret buried here too? Next to Jonas, with the baby. Can I see? Ethan led her 20 feet to the left, where two more wooden crosses stood. Margaret's, and beside it a smaller one, so small it broke his heart every time he saw it. Daughter, born and died April 15th, 1876. Not even a name. He'd been too destroyed to think of one. Claire knelt, ignoring the protest from her healing feet. She touched the small cross with gentle fingers. What would you have named her? I don't know. Margaret wanted Grace. I never told her yes or no. And then it was too late. Grace Wolfe, Claire said softly. That's beautiful. Can I add it? Ethan felt his throat tighten. 7 years that cross had stood nameless because he had been too broken, too guilty, too angry at God and himself to give his daughter the dignity of a name. And here was this woman he'd known 2 weeks offering to fix what he'd been unable to face. Yes, he managed. I'd like that. They stayed on the hill until the sun started its descent, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber. Claire told him about her mother who'd died when she was 12, about how her father had never recovered, had spent the next 11 years slowly collapsing under the weight of loss, about how she'd raised herself and her sister, becoming an adult before she was ready. Ethan told her about the war they'd run from, about being drafted to fight for a cause neither he nor Nathan believed in, about how they deserted 3 days before their regiment marched, had headed west before anyone could catch them, about the shame and relief of that choice, how it still sat in his gut like stones. Do you regret it? Claire asked. Running, no. If we'd fought, we'd be dead. Or worse, olive and broken in ways we could never fix. But I regret that it was necessary. Regret that the world made us choose between honor and survival. Honor is overrated, Claire said. Survival at least gives you the chance to maybe do some good later. Death just makes you a memory people argue about. Ethan laughed, surprised. That's a dark way to look at it. I'm a dark person sometimes. She smiled at him. Don't let the bread baking fool you. Inside, I'm all sharp edges and bitter truths. Good, Ethan said. Sweet things don't last out here. They rot, but sharp edges, those endure. They walked back down the hill together. Claire leaning more heavily on her walking stick, Ethan close enough to catch her, but giving her space to manage. When they reached the cabin, Nathan was on the porch, rifle across his knees, eyes scanning the tree line. Wolves, Ethan asked. Tracks, fresh, circling the chicken coop. Nathan stood. Lost a hen this morning. They're getting bold. Claire's face went pale. Will they come for us? No, Nathan said. They want easy meat. Chickens. Maybe a calf if they catch one alone. But they're testing. Seeing what they can take without getting shot. We'll need to keep watch tonight, Ethan said. Take shifts. I can help, Claire offered. Both brothers looked at her. You can barely walk, Nathan said. But I can shoot. You taught me to handle the rifle, remember? For emergencies. Well, this is an emergency. She was right. Over the past week, Ethan had shown her the basics. How to load aim fire. She'd been a quick study, her city-bred hands adapting to the weapon's weight and recoil. But knowing how to shoot and actually shooting at living things were different skills entirely. You ever kill anything? Nathan asked. No. Wolves aren't chickens. You wound one, make it angry, it'll come for you. You have to be sure. No hesitation. Then teach me to be sure. Nathan looked at Ethan, who shrugged. Extra pair of eyes can't hurt, and she should know how to defend herself anyway. What if something happens when we're both gone? Fine, Nathan said. But you're on watch with me. Ethan takes first shift alone. You and I take second together. That way I can make sure you don't accidentally shoot one of us. That night, Ethan sat on the porch with his rifle watching darkness settle over the valley. The temperature dropped quickly once the sun disappeared, frost forming on the grass, his breath visible in the lamplight spilling from the cabin windows. Behind him, he could hear Nathan and Claire talking in low voices, the rhythm of ordinary conversation. It sounded right, natural, like something that had always been there. The wolves came around midnight. Ethan heard them before he saw them. The chickens in their coop went silent, that particular stillness that meant predators nearby. Then movement in the shadows beyond the barn, eyes reflecting lamplight, green and cold, and calculating. He stood slowly, bringing the rifle to his shoulder, tracking movement. 3 wolves, maybe 4. Hard to tell in the darkness. They were circling, looking for weaknesses in the coop's defenses, intelligent enough to be cautious but hungry enough to be persistent. The cabin door opened. Nathan emerged rifle ready, Claire behind him with Ethan's spare Winchester. She moved carefully, quietly, taking a position against the porch rail where the wood would support the rifle's weight. Northeast corner, Ethan murmured. 3 of them. I see 4, Nathan said. 1 by the barn, big one, probably the alpha. The wolves tested the coop's wire looking for gaps. One of the chickens panicked, squawking loudly, and the wolves went still, listening, calculating risk versus reward. Ethan aimed at the alpha finger on the trigger but didn't fire. Warning shots first. Give them the chance to leave. No point killing if you didn't have to. Bullets were expensive, and wolves were just trying to survive, same as everyone else. He fired into the air. The cracks split the night, echoing off the mountains. The wolves scattered, melting back into shadows, but Ethan knew they hadn't gone far. Just far enough to regroup, to wait. They'll be back, Nathan said. Tomorrow night, or the night after. Ethan lowered his rifle. We need to reinforce that coop, add another layer of wire, make it too much work for the payoff. They went back inside. Claire made coffee, her hands steady despite the adrenaline he could see humming through her. She poured 3 cups, passed them around, then sat by the fire. Is it always like this? She asked, living with the constant threat. Yes, Nathan said. Mountain doesn't care about your comfort, doesn't care if you're scared. You learn to live with the fear or you leave. I'm not leaving. The words hung in the air, simple, direct, absolute. Nathan's jaw tightened. 6 weeks, Claire, that was the agreement. Agreements change, not this one. Why not? Her eyes challenged him. Give me one good reason why I can't stay. Because this isn't your life, Nathan said. You came here for Jonas. Jonas is dead. There's nothing for you here. There's work, there's purpose, there's a place I'm needed. You're needed in town too. You could find work there. Live among people. Have a normal life. I don't want normal, Claire said. I've had normal. Normal is Philadelphia and creditors and men who look at me like I'm property to be bought. Normal is suffocating. This, she gestured at the cabin at the mountains beyond. This is breathing. Ethan watched his brother struggle, saw Nathan searching for arguments that would convince her, that would protect them both from the complication she represented. But Ethan also saw the way Nathan looked at her when he thought no one was watching. Saw the softening around his eyes, the careful attention to her needs, the quiet pride when she mastered something new. Nathan was already attached, was already halfway to caring more than he wanted to admit. And that terrified him. "We can't give you what you're looking for," Nathan said finally. "What do you think I'm looking for?" "A husband, a family, the things Jonas promised." "Jonas promised work and a roof," Claire corrected. "That's all. I'm not asking for anything more." "You should be," Ethan said quietly. Both of them looked at him. "You're 23 years old, Claire. You deserve more than just work and a roof. You deserve someone who loves you, someone who can give you children, a real home, a future. And you think I'll find that in town among strangers?" Claire shook her head. "I've seen how men look at me, Ethan. What they want, what they think I'm worth. At least here you both see me as a person, as someone capable and useful. That's worth more than romance." "For now," Nathan said. "But in a year, 2 years, when you're still here, still unmarried, still just the help, you'll resent us. Resent this choice. You don't know that." "I do. Because I watched it happen with Margaret. Watched her slowly realize she'd traded one cage for another. Watched her hate herself for staying and hate Ethan for not letting her go." The words hit hard. Ethan flinched, old wounds reopening. Claire looked between them, understanding dawning. "I'm not Margaret," she said softly. "Everyone says that," Nathan replied, "right up until they become her." He stood grabbing his coat. "I'm checking the stock. Ethan, you take first watch. Claire gets some sleep." He was gone before either could respond, the door closing with deliberate gentleness that was somehow worse than slamming. Claire and Ethan sat in the silence Nathan left behind. The fire crackled. Outside wind moved through the pines with a sound like distant water. "He's protecting himself," Ethan said eventually. "Not trying to hurt you." "I know." Claire stared into her coffee. "He's scared I'll break, that I'll become another person he couldn't save." "Are you going to break?" She looked at him, eyes clear and certain. "No, because I'm not here trying to be saved. I'm here trying to build something." "There's a difference." "What are you trying to build?" "A life that's mine. Not my father's leftover debts. Not Pruitt's transaction. Not Jonas's mail order solution. Mine. Built with my own hands. My own choices." She paused. "Is that so terrible?" "No," Ethan said. "It's not terrible at all." They sat together until Claire's eyes started to drift closed, exhaustion winning over will. Ethan helped her to bed, waited until he heard her breathing even out into sleep, then took his position on the porch for the first watch. The wolves didn't return that night, but Ethan stayed vigilant, rifle across his knees, watching shadows for movement, thinking about what Claire had said, about building something that was hers, about choosing this life not because she had no options, but because this was the option she wanted. It was more than Margaret had ever given him. Margaret had chosen him because he was better than nothing, had stayed because leaving seemed harder, had died resenting every moment of the life they'd built. But Claire was different. Claire had walked 40 miles on shredded feet not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she decided this was where she belonged. That took a different kind of courage, the kind that saw clearly and chose anyway. Morning came gray and cold. Nathan returned from checking the stock, his face carefully blank. They worked through the day in tense silence, the conversation from last night sitting between them like a wall. Claire broke it around noon, emerging from the cabin with sandwiches and coffee. She handed them to the brothers, where they were reinforcing the chicken coop, adding a second layer of wire. "I'm sorry," she said, "for pushing last night, for making this harder than it needs to be." "You didn't make anything hard," Ethan said. "I did. I'm asking you both to change the agreement, to let me stay beyond 6 weeks. That's not fair when you've already been so generous." Nathan hammered a staple into wood, the sound sharp and final. "Why do you want to stay, Claire, really? Strip away all the talk about building him on and choosing and breathe. Why here? Why us?" She was quiet for a moment, considering. Then she said, "Because for the first time in my life, I'm not trying to be someone I'm not. I'm not performing femininity for Philadelphia society. I'm not pretending to be weaker than I am so men feel superior. I'm not hiding my opinions or my intelligence or my capabilities. Here I can just be, work hard, contribute, exist without apology. That's why." Nathan studied her, something shifting in his expression. "And if we say yes, if we let you stay, what then?" "Then I work, I keep house, I help however I can, and I don't ask for anything more than a fair share of what we build together. No expectations of marriage of us being more than employers. None, Claire said firmly. I came here for Jonas. Jonas is gone. That door is closed. I'm not trying to open it with either of you. It was the right thing to say, the safe thing, the thing that should have reassured Nathan and made this easier. But Ethan felt something twist in his chest at her words, something that felt uncomfortably like disappointment, which was insane. He didn't want complications, didn't want romantic entanglement, had spent 7 years avoiding exactly that. Claire's declaration should have been relief. Instead, it felt like loss. I need to think about it, Nathan said. This isn't a decision we can make lightly. I understand. Give us a week. We'll talk it through. Give you an answer then. Claire nodded, accepting the timeline without argument. She took the empty coffee cups and headed back to the cabin, her limp barely noticeable now, her walking stick more habit than necessity. When she was gone, Nathan turned to his brother. Well, what? Do we let her stay? Ethan hammered another staple, buying time to think. What does your gut say? My gut says she's dangerous, not because she's bad, but because she's good, because she fits, because already I can't remember what this place felt like before she was here, and that scares me. Scares me too. But Nathan knew there was a but, could read it in Ethan's face. But sending her away feels worse, feels like we'd be making the same mistake we made with Margaret, trying to protect ourselves by keeping people out. And where did that get us? 15 years of isolation, 15 years of just surviving instead of living. We're alive, that counts for something. Does it? Ethan looked at his brother. Or are we just ghosts going through motions? Claire called it right. We're breathing, but we're not living. Haven't been for a long time. Nathan was quiet, his hands stilling on the wire. If we let her stay and it goes wrong, then it goes wrong, but at least we tried, at least we took the chance. You sound like you want her to stay. I do. Ethan met his brother's eyes. Not for the reasons you think. Not because I want a wife or a woman in my bed, but because she makes this place feel like it matters again. Like we're building something instead of just maintaining it. I'd forgotten what that felt like. Nathan nodded slowly. She does that, doesn't she? Makes things matter. Yeah, she does. They worked in silence for a while, adding wire, reinforcing posts, building defenses against wolves that would test them again and again. The work was familiar, rhythmic, the kind that let your mind wander while your hands stayed busy. Nathan stood abruptly, walked to the window, stared out at the mountains. His shoulders were tight, his breathing controlled. Ethan recognized the signs. His twin was fighting something internal, something that terrified him. I watched you bury Margaret, Nathan said, voice low. Watched you dig that grave with your bare hands because you couldn't stand to let anyone else do it. Watched you put your wife and your daughter in the ground, and then watched you die inside for 7 years. He turned. I won't watch that again, Ethan. I can't. You won't have to, Ethan said. How do you know? How can you possibly know? Claire won't break the same way. Because she already broke, Ethan said quietly. In Philadelphia, under her father's debts, under Pruitt's proposition, she walked 40 miles on shredded feet after she'd already been broken, Nathan. And she's still here, still standing. That's not someone who breaks easy. Nathan's jaw worked. And if I'm wrong, if letting her stay destroys all three of us, then at least we'll have tried to live instead of just survive. The silence stretched, then Nathan nodded once, sharp and final. 1 month, Nathan said eventually. We let her stay 1 month past the original 6 weeks. See how it goes. If it's working, we revisit. If it's not, she has enough time to make other plans without rushing. That's fair. And we tell her tonight. No point making her wait a week when we've already decided. Ethan felt something loosen in his chest. Relief, anticipation, fear, all tangled together into a knot he couldn't unpick. You're sure? No, Nathan said, but I'm willing. That's going to have to be enough. That evening they told Claire. She cried, tried to hide it, but failed, tears running down her face while she laughed and thanked them and promised to work harder than ever. Her joy was so pure, so unguarded that both brothers felt their own throats tighten. This was what hope looked like. This was what it meant to be given a chance when you'd thought all chances were gone. That night, Claire made them the best meal they'd eaten in years. Roasted chicken potatoes with the herbs from the garden bread still warm from the oven, and a pie made from the last of the preserved apples. They ate until they couldn't move, sat by the fire, drinking coffee, talking about plans for the coming winter. For the first time in 15 years, the cabin felt full, complete. Like all the empty spaces had been filled with warmth and purpose, and the possibility of something better. But outside in the darkness, the wolves waited, patient, hungry, testing boundaries, looking for weaknesses, reminding them that the mountain always took its due. For tonight they had this: safety and warmth and the fragile beginning of trust. It would have to be enough. The wolves came 3 weeks later, on a night when both brothers were gone. Ethan had ridden to Bridger Falls for supplies. Nathan was checking the north fence line, a day's work that had stretched into two, when he found sections torn down, evidence of something larger than wolves testing their boundaries. Claire was alone in the cabin when she heard the chicken scream. She grabbed the rifle without thinking, muscle memory from weeks of practice guiding her hands. The Winchester felt heavy but familiar now, an extension of will rather than a foreign object. She moved to the window, saw them in the moonlight. 6 wolves, maybe 7, circling the reinforced coop with intelligent patience. The alpha was massive gray and scarred its eyes, finding hers through the glass. It held her gaze for 3 heartbeats, then charged the coop. Claire fired. The shot went wide, but it scattered the pack. They regrouped at the tree line, watching her now, calculating. She reloaded, hands steady despite the fear hammering in her chest. This was the moment Nathan had warned her about. The moment when you discovered whether you had the steel to actually pull the trigger when it mattered. The alpha charged again. This time Claire didn't hesitate. She aimed, breathed out slowly the way Ethan had taught her, and fired. The wolf went down hard, yelping once before going silent. The pack scattered into darkness, leaving their fallen leader bleeding in the dirt. Claire stood at the window until her hands stopped shaking, until dawn painted the mountains gold, until she heard hoofbeats and saw Nathan riding hard up the trail, having heard the shots from miles away. He found her on the porch, rifle across her knees, the dead wolf at her feet. "You're bleeding," he said, dismounting in one fluid motion. Claire looked down. A cut on her hand from broken glass where a stray wolf had tested the window. She hadn't even felt it. "I killed it," she said. "The alpha." The others ran. Nathan examined the wolf, then looked at her with something new in his eyes. Respect. Recognition. "Clean shot, right through the heart. You taught me well." "No." Nathan knelt beside her, took her bleeding hand in his. "I taught you mechanics. You brought the courage. That's all yours, Claire." Ethan returned that evening to find them burning the wolf's body, the smoke rising black against the sunset. When they told him what happened, he pulled Claire into an embrace that surprised all 3 of them, holding her like something precious he'd thought lost. "You could have been killed," he said into her hair. "But I wasn't." She pulled back, meeting his eyes. "I survived, just like you taught me." That night marked a shift. Claire was no longer the injured woman they were helping. She was a partner who'd proven herself when it mattered most. The invisible walls between them began to crumble, replaced by something deeper than gratitude, stronger than obligation. Harrison Pruitt arrived 2 weeks later. He came with 3 hired men and a forged document claiming Claire as collateral for her father's debts. He found her alone at the south pasture, Nathan in town for supplies. Claire saw the riders from the window and felt her blood turn to ice. But she didn't run. Instead, she grabbed the Winchester and stepped onto the porch. "Mr. Pruitt," her voice was steady, "you have no claim on me. The law disagrees." He dismounted, his silver hair gleaming in the afternoon light. "Your sister was most helpful, showed me the letter you sent from the train. My father would never have signed me away as collateral. Desperate men do desperate things." He smiled. "Come quietly, Claire. Work off the debt as my wife, or I involve the federal marshal." Then hoofbeats, Nathan riding hard up the trail, rifle already in hand. He took in the scene in seconds. Claire armed Pruitt, smug, 3 hired guns positioned strategically. "This is private property," Nathan said, dismounting slowly. "State your business or leave." Pruitt explained, showed papers, made his claim. "The signature's forged," Nathan said flatly. "Any fool can see it. Prove it in court." "Or I could prove it here." Nathan's rifle came up. "Your choice." The hired guns moved for their weapons. Claire's Winchester tracked the nearest one. Mexican standoff. Pruitt studied them, the mountain man with steady hands, the woman who'd already killed a wolf. These weren't soft city people. These were survivors. Keep her then, he said, finally remounting. But this isn't over. Yes, it is, Claire said, because if you or your friends come back, I'll shoot you just like I shot the wolf that tried to take what's mine. Something in her voice made him believe her. He rode away without looking back. They watched until the dust settled. Nathan's hand found Claire's shoulder. He won't return, he said. Men like that don't fight battles they can't win. He was right. Pruitt never came back. But Claire kept the rifle close for months afterward just in case. The shift happened slowly then, all at once. Small touches that lingered. Glances held too long. The night Claire woke screaming from nightmares about Pruitt and found Ethan already at her door, Nathan close behind. The way they took turns sitting with her until dawn, neither willing to leave, neither willing to name what was growing between them. It was Ethan who kissed her first a month after the wolves. A gentle press of lips after she'd fallen asleep by the fire, meant to be secret, but Nathan saw. And instead of anger, there was only understanding. A sullen acknowledgement that whatever they were building had no rules, no precedent, no name. Claire made her choice clear the night of the first heavy snow. She went to Ethan's room, the next night to Nathan's. And they never spoke of jealousy or possession, because the mountain had taught them that survival meant sharing everything, burdens, joys, and love that didn't fit into conventional shapes. Winter came hard that year. The passes closed early, snow piling 6 feet deep, the world reduced to the cabin and the barn and the line of rope between them. They survived on stored food and careful rationing on stories by the fire and long silences comfortable as blankets. Claire learned she was pregnant in December just as the first heavy snows began. The realization came slowly then, all at once. Morning sickness, missed courses, a tenderness that had nothing to do with cold. She told them over dinner, her voice steady despite the fear underneath. I'm carrying a child. Both brothers went still. Ethan's face drained of color, memories of Margaret's death written in every line. Nathan's hand found his twin's shoulder steadying. Whose? Nathan asked. Claire smiled sadly. Does it matter? It belongs to all of us. This family we've built. It matters because childbirth killed Margaret, Ethan said, his voice raw. Claire, I can't lose you too. You won't. She took his hand, placed it on her still flat stomach. Because I'm not her, and this time you're not alone. We'll face it together. The pregnancy was difficult but manageable. Nathan rode to town once the passes cleared, brought back a midwife, a stern woman named Agnes, who delivered half the babies in Montana territory. She stayed through the spring teaching Claire what to expect, teaching the brothers how to help. When labor came in April, it was long and hard and terrifying. Claire screamed curses at all of them, at the mountain, at every choice that had led to this moment. Ethan held her hand, whispered promises and prayers. Nathan assisted Agnes with steady hands despite the fear in his eyes. At dawn, after 14 hours, a baby's cry split the air. A boy, small but healthy with dark blonde hair and lungs that could wake the dead. Thomas, Claire said, holding him against her chest. His name is Thomas. Ethan wept. Nathan turned away so they wouldn't see his tears. Agnes cleaned up efficiently, pronounced everyone healthy, and left them to their joy. Thomas's first birthday came with the spring thaw. He took his first steps between Ethan and Nathan, both brothers kneeling with arms outstretched, both refusing to admit the tears in their eyes. Claire watched from the doorway, her hand resting on her belly, where a second child was growing. Grace arrived 2 years later on a summer morning, so beautiful it seemed impossible that anything could hurt. The labor was swift, almost easy, as if Claire's body had learned the way. When Grace cried her first cry, Ethan was the one who wept this time, holding his daughter. Their daughter was shaking hands. She has my mother's eyes, Claire whispered from the bed, exhausted but radiant. The same blue, the same gentle look. Ethan looked at the baby in his arms, at the name they'd chosen together. Grace, the name Margaret had wanted for their daughter, the name that had finally found its home. She has yours, he said, voice thick. Everything good in her is yours, but her name is for both of them. The daughter I lost and the daughter I found. Nathan stood in the doorway, Thomas on his hip, watching his brother hold his niece or daughter. The distinction had long stopped mattering. She's perfect, he said simply, and she was. The years that followed were not easy. The mountain never allowed easy, but they were good. Thomas grew into a boy who could track deer and quote Shakespeare, taught by three parents who each gave him different pieces of themselves. Grace became her namesake in every way, gentle, patient, with a laugh that could warm the coldest winter day. 3 more years passed. The cabin grew room by room. The garden expanded. The herd increased. They built a life that looked from the outside like any other mountain ranch. But the people in Bridger Falls knew better, knew about the arrangement, knew whose children Thomas and Grace really were. Or rather, they thought they knew. The truth was simpler and more complicated. The children belonged to all three of them. Blood didn't matter. Choice did. They became a family in every way that mattered, bound not by law or paper, but by choice renewed every morning. People in Bridger Falls whispered, of course, about the arrangement, about Claire living with two brothers, about whose children they really were. But the whispers held less judgment than curiosity, and eventually even that faded. The mountain made its own rules. The people who survived it learned to respect whatever worked. On Thomas's 6th birthday, they stood together on the hill where the graves lay. Grace's marker now bore her full name, carved deep into wood that would last decades. Margaret's cross had been replaced with stone, a grudging peace made with the past. Claire held baby Grace, watched Thomas chase butterflies among the wildflowers they'd planted. Ethan and Nathan stood on either side of her, solid, as the mountains themselves, unchanged by years, except for more gray in their beards, more lines around their eyes. Do you ever regret it? Ethan asked quietly. Staying, choosing this life. Claire looked at her children, at the valley spread below, at the cabin that had become home, at the two men who'd saved her by letting her save herself. Every day I'm grateful, she said, for the choice, for the chance, for all of it. Even the hard parts, especially those. She smiled. The mountain doesn't give anything freely, but what you earn here, you keep. That's worth more than easy comfort ever could be. They stood until the sun set, painting the valley in colors that had no names in light, that transformed ordinary things into something sacred. A family on a mountain, imperfect, unconventional, unbreakable. Below, wolves howled, but they kept their distance now. The pack had learned this family was not prey. Above, stars emerged, cold and infinite. Between earth and sky, 5 people who'd found each other against all odds held tight to what they'd built. And it was enough. It was everything.